Marcus Chen dragged the heavy scrubber across the metal floor of Docking Bay 7, his shoulders aching from 12 hours of constant work. The alien slime that coated every surface of the HFY ships required a special solvent that burned through human skin if you weren't careful. His hands, even protected by the thin gloves the hegemony provided, bore countless small scars from splashes and tears in the cheap material. The bay stretched out before him like a cathedral of despair. Massive HFY vessels hung from support cradles, their organic curves dripping with the same corrosive mucus that seemed to ooze from every surface of their technology. The smell was overwhelming, part rotting fish, part industrial solvent, part something else that human noses weren't designed to process. 3 years had passed since the hegemony arrived. 3 years since humanity's brief resistance crumbled beneath technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. 3 years since Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen of the 82nd Engineering Battalion became just another forced laborer in humanity's new reality. The HFY weren't cruel in the traditional sense. They didn't torture or kill for pleasure. They were simply efficient. Humans were a resource to be managed, categorized, and utilized. Former soldiers like Marcus fell into the lowest category, potential troublemakers who needed to be kept busy and exhausted. Hence the cleaning detail in the most unpleasant section of their orbital station. Marcus paused to wipe sweat from his forehead, careful not to let any of the corrosive residue touch his face. Through the bay's massive viewing window, Earth turned slowly below, a blue-green marble that looked deceptively peaceful from this distance. No signs of the massive refugee camps, the demolished cities, or the millions of humans struggling to adapt to their new reality. Worker 7749, your efficiency has decreased by 12% in the last hour. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, transmitted directly into his brain through the neural implant every human received upon processing. The hegemony's translation technology was perfect, turning the aliens' complex chemical communications into words Marcus could understand. It also served as a tracking and monitoring system, ensuring no human could hide or escape. Acknowledged, Marcus replied, not bothering to speak aloud. The implant would transmit his thoughts directly to the monitoring system. He returned to scrubbing, letting his mind wander as it often did during these endless shifts. Before the war, he'd been a specialist in advanced fabrication techniques, capable of building complex machinery from scraps. The military had valued his ability to repair anything, adapt any technology, and solve problems that stumped better-educated engineers. Now he cleaned alien slime. The irony wasn't lost on him. The hegemony's own maintenance systems were apparently too sophisticated to deal with their ship's biological waste products. They needed human hands and human adaptability to handle the messy, unpredictable work their automated systems couldn't manage. A new sound echoed through the bay, the distinctive hum of an approaching HFY patrol ship. Marcus looked up to see a sleek vessel gliding through the atmospheric barrier, its surface glistening with fresh secretions. He sighed and reached for a fresh container of solvent. Another ship meant another few hours of work. But this ship was different. As it settled into its cradle, Marcus noticed the markings along its hull, intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow even as he watched. Only high-ranking hegemony officials used ships with living hulls. Someone important had just arrived. The ship's entry port dilated with a wet, organic sound that always made Marcus's skin crawl. 3 figures emerged, and Marcus quickly averted his eyes. Looking directly at hegemony officials without permission was grounds for immediate punishment. The HFY moved with fluid grace across the bay floor. Their elongated forms wrapped in environment suits that sparkled with embedded technology. Behind them walked a human, the first Marcus had seen in the bay outside of cleaning crews. This human wore clean clothes, Actual shoes instead of the fabric wrappings the workers received, and most surprisingly of all, no visible restraints or monitoring devices. A collaborator, then. Someone who had found a way to make himself useful to the new order. Worker 7749. Marcus froze. The neural implant carried a different tone this time. Not the emotionless monitoring system, but an actual Kethvar speaking directly to him. Protocol demanded he drop his tools and assume a submissive posture, hands visible, eyes down. "You will accompany us," the alien continued. Its translation came through clearly, but Marcus could detect undertones of urgency in the original chemical signals. Something was wrong. He followed the group through corridors he'd never seen before, deeper into the station's core where only hegemony officials were permitted. The human collaborator glanced back at him once, and Marcus caught a glimpse of tired eyes and stress lines that spoke of sleepless nights. Whatever this was about, it wasn't routine. They entered a massive chamber filled with holographic displays showing star charts, ship schematics, and streams of data Marcus couldn't interpret. At the center of the room stood a creature unlike any Kethvar he'd ever seen. Where the others were sleek and graceful, this one was massive, with additional limbs and sensory organs that marked it as something far more evolved. Or perhaps genetically enhanced. The Sovereign. Marcus had heard whispers about the hegemony's ultimate authority figures. Being so advanced, they barely resembled their base species. He'd never expected to see one in person. Human soldier technician, the Sovereign's chemical signals translated into words that seemed to bypass his implant entirely, speaking directly to his consciousness. You possess knowledge of primitive fabrication techniques. It wasn't a question. Somehow the hegemony had identified his pre-war specialization from their vast databases of human records. Marcus nodded carefully, unsure if speaking would be appropriate. Our primary vessel has sustained damage that our automated systems cannot address. The affected components require improvisation, adaptation, qualities your species possesses in abundance. The holographic displays shifted, showing a massive ship unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. It stretched for kilometers, its surface a mixture of grown organic components and traditional technology. Red indicators highlighted damaged sections throughout the vessel's superstructure. "You're asking me to repair your ship?" Marcus asked, forgetting protocol in his surprise. The Sovereign's form shifted slightly, what might have been amusement in a human. "We are not asking, human. We are informing you of your new assignment. Failure will result in the elimination of 1,000 of your species from the surface camps. Success will result in improved conditions for your people." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach, 1,000 lives hanging in the balance, and they wanted him to fix something their own advanced technology couldn't handle. It was insane. "I'll need to see the damage myself," he heard himself saying, "and I'll need access to fabrication equipment, raw materials, and probably a team of assistants who understand the systems." "Acceptable," the Sovereign replied immediately. "You will be provided with necessary resources. Time is limited, human. The vessel must be operational within 72 of your rotational periods." 3 days. They wanted him to repair a kilometers-long alien starship in 3 days, or 1,000 innocent people would die. The human collaborator stepped forward, speaking for the first time. His voice was hoarse, strained. "Sovereign, perhaps we could extend the timeline. Complex repairs require—" "Silence." The word cut through the air like a blade. "You have failed to provide adequate solutions, Administrator Wells. This human will succeed where you have not, or the consequences will be severe for all involved." Wells fell silent, but Marcus caught something in his expression, not just fear, but a desperate hope. This wasn't the first human the hegemony had tried to solve their problem. Wells had been attempting repairs himself and failing. Now Marcus was the last option before they resorted to more drastic measures. "I'll need to inspect the damage site immediately," Marcus said, his engineering mind already working despite the terror coursing through his veins. "And I want a complete technical briefing on your ship's systems. I can't fix what I don't understand." The Sovereign gestured with one of its appendages, and the holographic display zoomed in on a specific section of the massive vessel. The damage was extensive, what looked like a catastrophic failure in some kind of power distribution system. Organic components had been torn away, revealing the underlying technological framework. "The vessel encountered unexpected spatial distortions during our latest expansion survey," the Sovereign explained. "Standard repair protocols have proven insufficient. The damaged sections require complete reconstruction using methods our automated systems cannot perform." Marcus studied the display, his mind racing. The technology was beyond anything humanity had ever developed, but the basic engineering principles seemed familiar. Power had to flow from point A to point B. Structural integrity had to be maintained. Heat had to be dissipated. The materials and methods might be alien, but the fundamental challenges were universal. "I can fix this," he said, surprising himself with his confidence. "But I'll need full access to your fabrication facilities, raw materials that can interface with both your biological and technological components, and at least 3 assistants who can work at my direction without questioning every decision." The Sovereign's massive form shifted again, and Marcus realized he was being evaluated not just as a potential solution to their problem, but as something far more interesting. A human who could think beyond the limitations his species had been assigned. "Your requirements will be met," the Sovereign decided. "Administrator Wells will coordinate your resources. You begin immediately." As they led him from the chamber toward what he hoped would be his new workspace, Marcus caught Wells' arm. The collaborator looked at him with eyes that held too much knowledge and not enough hope. "What happened to the others?" Marcus asked quietly. Wells was silent for a long moment, then so quietly the monitoring systems might not catch it. "There weren't any others. You're the first human they've trusted with something this important. Don't fail, Marcus. Please don't fail." The weight of 1,000 lives settled on Marcus's shoulders as they walked toward the docking bay that held humanity's most advanced enemy. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this might be more than just a repair job. This might be humanity's first real chance to prove they were worth more than just cleaning supplies and forced labor. He just had to succeed where the most advanced civilization in the galaxy had failed. No pressure at all. The Sovereign's personal vessel was even more impressive up close. Marcus stood at its base, craning his neck to take in the full scope of what he was being asked to repair. The ship stretched up and out like a living mountain, its surface rippling with barely visible movements that suggested the hull itself was breathing. Administrator Wells walked beside him, carrying a portable data unit that projected detailed schematics into the air between them. "The damage occurred here," he explained, highlighting a section roughly the size of a city block. "The power distribution network was completely severed when we hit the spatial distortion. The biological components died immediately, and the technological backup systems overloaded trying to compensate." Marcus studied the damage with the eye of an engineer who'd spent years improvising solutions in war zones. The organic components weren't just damaged, they were completely dead, leaving gaps in the ship's nervous system that would need to be bridged somehow. The technological elements were fused and twisted, their exotic materials warped beyond any conventional repair. "What exactly does this ship do?" Marcus asked as they walked through a temporary airlock into the damaged section. "I mean, why is it so important that it has to be fixed in 3 days?" Wells hesitated, glancing around as if checking for surveillance. It's not just any ship, Marcus. This is the hegemony's primary survey vessel. It locates and evaluates new worlds for integration into their empire. Without it, they can't expand, Marcus finished. They're stuck here until it's fixed. Worse than that, there are other hegemony factions out there, other groups competing for resources and territory. If the Sovereign can't continue the survey mission on schedule, they'll lose standing with the central authority, could even lose control of this entire sector. Marcus whistled low. No wonder they were desperate enough to trust a human with this repair. Their entire position of power depended on keeping this ship operational, and their own technology had failed them. The interior of the damaged section was a nightmare of twisted metal and dead flesh. What had once been elegant curves and flowing organic lines now resembled the aftermath of an explosion. The smell was overwhelming. Rotting biological matter mixed with the acrid stench of burned electronics. Jesus, Marcus muttered, pulling out a basic scanner Wells had provided. It's like someone detonated a bomb in the middle of a computer and I don't know, some kind of giant squid. The hegemony's technology depends on the integration of biological and mechanical components, Wells explained. The living portions handle adaptive responses and complex calculations, while the technological elements provide structure and raw power. When one system fails, the other usually compensates, but this time both were destroyed simultaneously. Marcus spent the next 4 hours methodically mapping the damage, taking measurements and trying to understand how the alien technology actually worked. The more he learned, the more impossible the task seemed. The biological components required living tissue that he couldn't replicate. The technological elements used materials that didn't exist in human science. But as he worked, patterns began to emerge. The fundamental principles weren't that different from human engineering. Power flowed along predictable paths. Data moved through logical networks. Stress and heat were managed through careful distribution systems. The implementation was alien, but the underlying concepts were universal. "I think I see the problem," Marcus said finally, sitting back on his heels in front of a particularly complex junction point. Their repair systems are too specialized. They can fix specific, predictable failures. But when something like this happens, catastrophic damage to multiple integrated systems, they don't have protocols for it. Wells nodded. That's what I concluded as well. I've been trying to develop new protocols for the automated systems, but they're not designed for true improvisation. They need exact specifications, precise tolerances, perfect integration. Any deviation from their programmed parameters causes them to fail. But humans don't work that way, Marcus said, a slow smile spreading across his face. We're really, really good at making things work with whatever we've got available. We don't need perfect, we just need functional. He stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. Wells, I need you to get me 3 things. First, access to whatever fabrication equipment you've got available, even if it's just basic human technology. Second, a complete inventory of all available materials. Human, HFY, doesn't matter. Third, I need those assistants I was promised, but I want humans, not aliens. Humans? Are you sure? The HFY workers are much more skilled with their own technology. Marcus shook his head. That's exactly the problem. HFY workers think like HFY engineers. They'll try to rebuild this exactly the way it was before, using materials and techniques that we don't have access to. I need people who can think outside the box, who can look at this mess and see possibilities instead of just following protocols. Wells made notes on his data unit. I can probably arrange that. The Sovereign did say you'd have full authority over the repair process. But Marcus, are you really confident you can make this work? Because if you fail, 1,000 people die, I know. Marcus looked around the devastated chamber, his engineering instincts finally overriding his fear. But you know what, Wells? I spent 4 years in the Army fixing things that nobody thought could be fixed. Tanks that got blown in half, communication equipment that took direct hits from plasma weapons, entire bases that were running on improvised power systems held together with wire and prayer. He gestured at the damaged ship around them. This is just a bigger version of the same problem. Power needs to flow from here to here. Data needs to move along these pathways. Structure needs to be maintained. The materials and methods might be different, but the principles are the same. Over the next 8 hours, Marcus threw himself into the repair with an intensity that surprised even himself. The fabrication equipment the hegemony provided was incredibly sophisticated, capable of manipulating matter at the molecular level. Combined with his knowledge of human improvisation techniques, it opened up possibilities he'd never imagined. The breakthrough came when he stopped trying to replicate the original biological components and started thinking about functional alternatives. The organic elements had served as adaptive processors, adjusting power flow and data routing in response to changing conditions. But the same function could be achieved using much simpler technology, basic computer processors running adaptive algorithms. It doesn't have to be elegant, Marcus explained to his 3 human assistants as they worked to install his jury-rigged solution. It just has to work. We're not trying to win any engineering awards here. Sarah Kim, a former electronics specialist, looked skeptical as she helped route power cables through sections of the ship that had never been designed for human access. But will the ship's central systems accept our modifications? I mean, we're basically performing surgery on something that's half alive. That's why we're going to test everything in isolation first, Marcus replied, connecting an improvised interface to one of the ship's data nodes. We build our own little network, make sure it works, then gradually integrate it with the main systems. The work was exhausting and dangerous. The ship's remaining biological components occasionally reacted to their presence with defensive responses. Walls that tried to close around them, floors that became suddenly slippery, air that turned acidic without warning. But Marcus's team adapted, learning to read the ship's moods and work around its defenses. By the end of the first day, they had restored power to roughly 20% of the damaged section. It wasn't pretty. Human cables and processors were grafted directly onto alien technology, using connections that violated every safety protocol Marcus had ever learned. But it worked. Administrator Wells watched their progress with growing amazement. The Sovereign's engineers have been studying this problem for weeks, he told Marcus during a brief break. They've run thousands of simulations, tested hundreds of different approaches, and you're actually making it work with equipment they'd consider primitive. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of alien lubricant across his skin. That's because they're thinking like Kethvar. They want perfect integration, seamless interfaces, elegant solutions. We're just trying to make the damn thing work. But as they continued working, Marcus began to realize that their repair was accomplishing something more significant than just restoring function. His improvised solutions were actually improving on the original design in some ways. The human-built adaptive processors could handle conditions that would have confused the biological components. The routing algorithms they'd developed were more flexible than the ship's original neural pathways. "Wells," he said quietly during the second day, "I think we need to talk privately." They found a small maintenance compartment away from the main work area, where the ship's monitoring systems might not be as comprehensive. Marcus activated a small electromagnetic pulse generator he'd built from spare parts, creating a brief window of electronic interference. "I don't think this is really about repairing their ship," Marcus said quickly, before the monitoring systems could compensate. "I think it's a test. They want to see what humans can do when we're given access to their technology." Wells nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing. The damage was too convenient, too perfectly suited to human problem-solving abilities. And the timeline, 3 days, is just enough pressure to make us work at maximum efficiency without enough time to really understand what we're doing. The question is, what happens when we succeed? Do they give us better jobs, or do they decide we're too dangerous to leave alive? Before Wells could answer, Marcus's jury-rigged alarm system activated. Someone was approaching their hiding spot. Multiple someones, moving with the fluid grace of Kethvar officials. They emerged from the maintenance compartment to find the Sovereign waiting for them, flanked by several other high-ranking aliens that Marcus didn't recognize. The massive being's attention seemed focused entirely on the repair work, studying the improvised connections and modified systems with what might have been fascination. Remarkable, the Sovereign's translated thoughts filled the air around them. Your species approaches engineering challenges from fundamentally different principles than our own. Where we seek perfection, you embrace adequacy. Where we demand precision, you accept approximation. Marcus felt his heart racing, but forced himself to speak calmly. The repairs are ahead of schedule, Sovereign. We should have full function restored within the next 18 hours. Yes, the alien replied, still studying the human modifications. But that is not why we are here. We have been monitoring your work, human soldier technician. Your solutions demonstrate capabilities we had not fully recognized in your species. The other aliens moved closer, and Marcus realized he was surrounded. Wells stepped protectively closer, but Marcus knew it would make no difference if the hegemony had decided they posed a threat. Your modifications will not be removed after the repairs are complete, the Sovereign continued. They will remain as permanent improvements to our vessel, and you, human, will be assigned to our engineering council as a consultant on adaptive fabrication techniques. Marcus blinked in surprise. This wasn't elimination or punishment. It was promotion. A massive, unprecedented elevation in status for a human worker. What about my team? He asked. They've been essential to this success. They will be assigned to appropriate technical positions throughout the fleet, the Sovereign replied. Your species' approach to engineering challenges may prove valuable across many applications. As the aliens departed, Marcus realized that everything had changed, not just for him, but potentially for all of humanity. They'd just proven that humans could contribute something valuable to the hegemony, something the aliens couldn't achieve on their own. The question was whether that would make humanity more valuable or more threatening to their new masters. The final phase of the repair began at what humans would call dawn, though time held little meaning aboard the hegemony station. Marcus stood before the massive ship's central power core, watching displays that showed power flowing through his improvised network like blood through artificial veins. His human-built processors hummed alongside alien technology that was older than human civilization, somehow managing to speak the same language. Sarah Kim worked alongside two other specialists, monitoring the integration points where human engineering met Kethvar biotechnology. Power levels are stable across all sectors, she reported. Your adaptive routing algorithms are actually improving efficiency in sectors that weren't even damaged. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something more significant than technical success. Around them, Kethvar engineers watched the repair with expressions that their translation implants couldn't fully convey. There was something in their posture, their chemical signals, that suggested not just surprise, but genuine respect. The biological components are responding well to your interface protocols, Administrator Wells said, checking readings on his portable scanner. It's almost like they prefer your approach to the original design. The organic elements seem more comfortable with the imperfection. That makes sense, Marcus replied, making minor adjustments to one of his jury-rigged processors. Living things aren't perfect. They adapt, they work around damage, they find ways to keep functioning even when conditions aren't ideal. Our technology is more like that than theirs is. Over the past 3 days, Marcus had come to understand something fundamental about the hegemony's approach to engineering. Their technology was incredibly advanced, but it was also rigid. Every component was designed to precise specifications, every system optimized for perfect conditions. When something went wrong, their automated repair systems could fix predictable problems, but they struggled with true catastrophic failure. Humans, on the other hand, had spent their entire technological development learning to make things work under impossible conditions. Every human engineer had experience with broken equipment, missing parts, and inadequate resources. They'd learned to embrace good enough because perfect was rarely an option. Marcus. The Sovereign's mental voice cut through his thoughts with an urgency that made everyone in the chamber freeze. Activate the primary systems. Now. Through the ship's viewing ports, Marcus could see why. 3 massive vessels were approaching the station, their hulls bearing markings he didn't recognize, but that clearly meant something significant to the HFY. The aliens around him were moving with barely controlled panic, their usual fluid grace replaced by sharp, aggressive motions. Competition, Wells explained quickly as Marcus began the startup sequence. Another hegemony faction. If they arrive before our repairs are complete, they can challenge the Sovereign's authority and claim this sector for themselves. The ship's systems came online with agonizing slowness. Each subsystem had to be checked, each connection verified, each compatibility issue resolved in real time. Marcus's improvised solutions were holding, but they needed several more minutes to reach full operational capacity. The approaching vessels are requesting communication, one of the HFY engineers announced. They demand proof of our continued expansion capability. The Sovereign's massive form shifted toward Marcus with an intensity that was almost physical. Human engineer. Can your repairs support immediate departure? Marcus checked his displays, his heart racing as he calculated stress factors and power distribution. His jury-rigged systems hadn't been designed for the massive energy requirements of faster-than-light travel. The connections he'd made were functional, but they weren't built to hegemony safety standards. I don't know, he admitted. The repairs will hold under normal conditions, but FTL travel puts enormous stress on all ship systems. My modifications might fail catastrophically. The Sovereign was silent for a long moment, and Marcus could feel the weight of decision pressing down on everyone in the chamber. The safe choice would be to delay departure, to spend weeks properly integrating the human modifications with HFY technology. But safety wouldn't save the Sovereign's position if the competing faction arrived first. We proceed, the Sovereign decided. All personnel to emergency stations. Prepare for immediate departure. Marcus's team scrambled to secure their equipment as the ship began its startup sequence. Massive organic systems came alive around them, walls pulsing with increased circulation, floors becoming warm and slightly yielding. The air itself seemed to thicken as the ship's biological components prepared for the stress of interstellar travel. Marcus! Sarah's voice carried over the growing hum of activated systems. Power coupling 7 is showing instability. The biological interface isn't accepting the full load. He rushed to the indicated station, where one of his improvised processors was struggling to handle the increasing power demands. The original biological component would have adapted automatically, but his electronic replacement was working at its absolute limits. I need 5 minutes to recalibrate, Marcus called out. We do not have 5 minutes, the Sovereign replied. The competing faction will be in communication range in 3. Marcus stared at the failing system, his mind racing through possibilities. The electronic processor couldn't handle the load, but maybe it didn't need to. The surrounding biological tissue was still alive, still capable of adaptation. What if he could convince it to work with his technology instead of replacing it entirely? Sarah, bring me a bio-interface cable, the kind we use for direct neural connection, he ordered, and someone find me a portable power supply. What are you doing? Wells asked, watching as Marcus began connecting cables directly from his own neural implant to the ship's biological systems. Something either brilliant or suicidal, Marcus replied, feeling the alien ship's consciousness touch the edges of his mind. The sensation was indescribable, vast, ancient, and utterly inhuman, but somehow familiar. Like touching the mind of something that understood engineering problems on an instinctual level. The ship's biological systems were designed to work with HFY minds, but Marcus's neural implant had been built by the hegemony using partially compatible technology. With some careful adjustment, he could serve as a bridge between his electronic systems and the ship's living components. "Power coupling 7 recalibrating," he announced as the connection solidified. The failing processor settled into a stable rhythm, now supported by biological systems that could adapt to changing conditions. All systems showing green. The Sovereign's approval filled the chamber like a warm wind. "Impressive, human engineer. Prepare for departure." Marcus had never experienced faster-than-light travel before. Human technology had never achieved anything close to it, and he'd expected some kind of dramatic acceleration or visual effect. Instead, the transition was almost anticlimactic. One moment they were docked at the station, the next they were moving through space at velocities that defied comprehension. But his improvised repairs held. Power flowed steadily through his jury-rigged systems, data moved along his improvised pathways, and structural integrity remained solid despite stresses that would have torn a human ship apart. "All systems operating within acceptable parameters," Sarah reported, amazement clear in her voice. "Actually, some of our modifications are performing better than the original specifications." Marcus smiled, finally allowing himself to believe they'd actually succeeded. Around him, HFY engineers were studying readouts with what looked like professional admiration. His team had not just fixed the Sovereign's ship, they'd improved it. Over the following hours, as the ship traveled toward its next survey target, Marcus found himself in conversations he'd never expected to have. HFY engineers asked detailed questions about human fabrication techniques, adaptive programming methods, and improvisation strategies. For the first time since the invasion, humans were being treated as colleagues rather than conquered subjects. "Your species approaches problems from a fundamentally different angle than ours," explained Technician Veltar, one of the ship's senior engineers. "We design for optimal conditions and perfect integration. You design for survival and adaptation. Both approaches have value, but yours may be more practical for the challenges we face during expansion." Administrator Wells pulled Marcus aside during one of the breaks. "Do you realize what's happening here? This isn't just about fixing one ship. You've demonstrated that humans can contribute to hegemony technology in ways they never considered. Word of this is going to spread throughout their hierarchy." Marcus nodded, watching Earth shrink in the viewing port as they traveled deeper into space. "The question is whether that's good or bad for humanity. Are we about to become valued partners, or a strategic resource they need to control more carefully?" His answer came 3 days later, when the Sovereign summoned him to the ship's central command chamber. The massive alien stood before a holographic display showing star charts that covered thousands of light years, with dozens of worlds marked for survey and potential integration. "Human engineer Marcus Chen," the Sovereign began, "your innovations have proven exceptionally valuable during our current mission. The adaptive systems you developed have allowed us to operate in conditions that would have challenged even optimal HFY technology." Marcus waited, sensing that more was coming. "The Hegemony Council has approved a new initiative based on your success. Human engineers will be integrated into survey and expansion teams throughout the Empire. Your species will receive improved status, enhanced living conditions, and access to advanced technology in exchange for your adaptive engineering capabilities." Marcus felt a mixture of hope and wariness. "What about the humans still in the camps? The forced labor details?" "All humans with engineering or technical skills will be reassigned to appropriate positions. Others will be offered educational opportunities to develop relevant capabilities. Your species' potential has been underestimated. It wasn't freedom, not exactly, but it was something far better than the grinding oppression humanity had endured for 3 years. Humans would become junior partners in the hegemony rather than simple laborers, valued for their unique approach to problem-solving. As Marcus looked out at the stars ahead, he realized that humanity's future might be written not in conquest or rebellion, but in proving that sometimes the best solution wasn't the most elegant one. Sometimes survival trumped perfection, and adaptability was more valuable than precision. The boy who had once cleaned alien slime from docking bays now stood in the command center of an interstellar vessel, helping to plan humanity's expansion into the galaxy. It wasn't the victory anyone had imagined during the Resistance, but it might be something even more important. It was a chance to prove that humans belonged among the stars, not as conquerors or servants, but as the galaxy's best improvisers, adapters, and fixers of impossible problems. The hegemony had technology beyond human comprehension, but humanity had something equally valuable: the absolute refusal to accept that any problem was truly unfixable. As they approached their next survey target, Marcus smiled and began planning modifications that would make the Sovereign's ship even better than its original designers had ever imagined. After all, that's what humans did best.